Thanks for joining a Clairvoyant Living series. This series is developed to help you understand what it means to live clairvoyantly. I'm Jackie Mahalchek.
And I'm Michelle Dupree. Thank you for joining us for our online series on empowerment through psychic development. And our goal is to help you understand more about change, empowerment, enlightenment, the self, intuitiveness, meditation, all of those concepts that we group under psychic or clairvoyant abilities.
One of the main topics that we want to start off with today is talking about change. And what does that mean? What does change mean to you? Are we talking individual or are we talking as a collective? Michelle, what does change mean to you?
Well, let's look at change from a few different perspectives. Let's look at change, what it means to personally change, what it means to collectively change, and what it means to be in relationship with others and change our relationships to each other in that sense. And so the one thing we absolutely understand about change is that it's constant. Things are always really changing. But are they really changing in the ways that we want them to? Or are we just repatterning parts of the past? Are we just changing things to only have them repeat again?
So you're trying to tell me that there's some way that I will be able to understand better how I could make change in my community just by listening and understanding clairvoyance?
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. So let's talk about...
It seems like a big reach to me. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody else out there is thinking that. They're thinking, how am I going to change the world? How am I going to make a change outward that's going to affect other people by being clairvoyant? We're not talking about magic tricks or casting spells, right?
Right. Yet.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I understand what change means. I understand how we need to first initiate any type of outward change, we need to be going inward.
To create change. Yes, and I think that's the biggest fallacy that we have in our culture. We try to create outward change, but until we understand what internal change is, we don't create sustainable change.
Sustainability.
And that is the key. Yes. The key is sustainability. And the reason we don't create sustainable change in our lives now is because we don't understand the whole self, the total self.
I keep saying this over and over. It's mind, body, and spirit.
Exactly.
You leave out one of them and we're out of balance. You can only make change go so far if you're not meeting all the needs of the self.
Exactly. And we'll be going into a series on the self. It's very extensive. But in order to first change the self, you do have to understand your totality. You have to understand that you are a physical body, a mental body, a spirit body, and an emotional body. And you have to understand the balance of each of those things internally, personally, so that you can then actually create sustainable change out in the world. We miss the two components of spirit and emotion because in our culture we're not used to looking at those things like that. Certainly not from a scientific perspective that allows us to incorporate those things every day. We're told to put emotion off and to ignore it and not give into it, and we leave spirit in religion.
A room and all by itself.
Exactly.
Alienated from everything else. So basically what you're saying is this broad perspective or idea of change is attainable once we kind of delve into the bullet points that you listed.
Exactly.
And that's what we're hoping to do with this series, is break down each one of those bullet points for you. Break down what empowerment means to you, what enlightenment means, what the self means.
Well, let me ask you this. Prior to doing this work, prior to being clairvoyant and living a clairvoyant life, what was change like? How did you incorporate change? Did you make change in your life? What did you think about change?
I think change was reactive for many people. For myself personally, it was I want to change something. I would dwell on what I wanted different. I would look at the outward experience and maybe it's as simple as changing the car I drove or changing this or changing outfits. It's changing things on an outward. And inevitably what would happen in any of those changes I made, the pattern would repeat itself or the situation would come up again. It wasn't really changed, it was only temporary. Going into the schools and making a difference with my kids' classes and changing the way something happened there it was only temporary. instead of going in and teaching people how to make the change sustainable and understanding it for myself what that meant, once I really tapped into being more clairvoyant and understanding my clairvoyance, that's when I started to really see the change make a difference. Because it's not, it's hard to describe, but it becomes different. Change becomes not ego-based.
Exactly, and it becomes not about always trying to
change others.
Find an answer. Because sometimes change is about allowing something to happen.
Sometimes
rather than making it happen.
True change comes from working through what you're experiencing instead of just masking it or trying to bend something to make it fit for you at that moment.
Well, how many times, long before I was doing this work as a clairvoyant, a career never sustained me. And so I would change careers, and every 3 years I was changing careers, and nothing ever fully sustained me.
It could be they didn't pay me enough, I'm not happy here, they're this, they're that. There's all these outward reasons for a lot of things that we want to change in our life, and we always put those change abilities onto somebody else.
Exactly.
It's like, well, that's because that's what they do and I can't do this because of that. Well, I think that's where change has always frustrated people.
Yes. And I was always trying to make change just based on an unhappy feeling, but not really addressing where that feeling was come from. Well, I'm just bored with this position. I need a new one. But I didn't really address the internal issue that said, this isn't really the right work for you. This is just the way you earn $1, but does it fulfill you? Does it make you happy? Once I made the change of finding something that made me happy, I was able to stick with it. I was actually able to foster it, love it, grow it, really put my heart into it.
It's really hard for people to understand that there's more work involved in change than just, pushing something through. You really have to divide it up, really analyze what it is that's causing you to want that change, like you said.
Exactly. You have to know what's driving that.
And what do you need to learn from it? So how does that affect the world? Let's say I want to change the world to be a better place. Get rid of all this fighting and war and bullying and all these things that are happening. How is that possible by just inward first and outward?
Well, the greatest thing about looking inward is that it allows us to see that we are all the same. When we look inward, we see our past, our present, our future. We see that we have been the victim and the aggressor. And suddenly we're all on equal playing fields. But also when you look inwardly and you address what's happening within yourself, you all of a sudden realize, okay, I am a part of everyone. My spirit is connected to everyone. My body might be separate, but my spirit is connected, which means if I'm harming myself, I'm harming another. And if another is harming me, then they're harming themselves as well.
So basically it's a ripple effect.
It really is. All of a sudden, I saw this article on Facebook a while back about bullying. How do you stop bullying? And, it was a wonderful campaign about a child who had, been tortured basically through bullying and that experience. And I thought about, I really should write. The only way that we're ever going to do away with bullying is by teaching children how to meditate, by teaching people how to go inward.
Yeah, I've seen similar articles on LinkedIn and other social medias out there about, wouldn't it be awesome if we were able to teach every third grader how to meditate?
Right.
How to just actually go within and trust themselves? Because if that happened, so many of these other outward experiences may not be taking place.
Exactly, they wouldn't, because we would become much more gentle, more kind, we would be loving, we would understand that that's really our core nature, that that's all that we really want, is to be loved, and we would apply that to someone else.
It's also taking that stance of being able to learn to look within and really look at situations with a sense of neutrality and understanding the situation and removing judgment from it. Because once you can do that and look at something, that change that starts within is, because we are our own worst enemies in looking at judgment. We judge ourselves constantly. And when you can start looking at yourself from a neutral standpoint, the sky is the limit. That's when you start actually looking at others in that same neutral sense. And then that goes to the next person. And I think if everybody can start to feel that, that's where that ripple effect takes place. And I think that's where ultimately we can change the world. It takes just one step at a time.
It does, and and it starts with the self. You have to change yourself in order to change the world. And I always think it's interesting, you know, we go to the streets and protest, but, you know, we don't go inward
We're
first,
still,
maybe
when
in that
you're on
sense.
those streets, there's a plus side to it and there's a negative. The
Right.
negative is we're still demanding somebody else to do a change.
Exactly,
We're
not taking
still-
personal responsibility.
Yeah, we're still pushing it out there. The positive side to it is enlightenment and awareness and making people know that there are other people that are like-minded. But there is definitely a more passionate and peaceful way of doing things.
And it brings everybody into a higher perspective. It changes ultimately when you bring people into seeing themselves and they become personally responsible for maintaining their own internal balances. What you all of a sudden need outwardly as government and governing bodies becomes very small, because all of a sudden every person is responsible for governing themselves.
Yeah.
And you know, that's what raises that vibration where we're all thinking from a higher perspective for what's basically good for the greater good rather than the ego self.
And we're not talking about going in and saying, this is the way you need to think from your heart, and in a sense, going out there and rallying like that is no better than someone else saying you need to think this religion or you need to think that religion or this political view. What we're talking about is learning to go within and look at it from a loving and neutral perspective. Because when you do that, it changes your view completely. And we're not asking you to pick sides. We're asking you to look at it objectively.
It changes your interactions with people. You become more tolerant, more loving and accepting, and all of a sudden their reactions with you become tolerant and accepting, and it's that ripple effect that, you know, you raise your vibration, you raise it for everyone else. You don't have to say a word, you just naturally do it.
So hopefully this has intrigued you guys enough that this is something that you want to tune back into and see the next series, so we can start to really delve into all the little components that will help us make change.
Exactly. Empowerment, enlightenment, the self, meditation, intuitiveness, all of those skills, all of those tools you need to be expanding and living the life you're really meant to live.
And hopefully what this will also do is realize that you have somewhere to go to listen to other people that just want to talk. We're just wanting to share our information and enlighten you along the way and let you know that you're not alone. We're all clairvoyant, whether or not you're going to put the title next to your name or not. Everybody's living a clairvoyant life.